I was sitting outside a local service center reading a newspaper when a stranger decided that was somehow an issue. I had stopped there after work, the kind of place you go for documents, ID renewals, and anything that tests your patience under buzzing fluorescent lights. It was supposed to be simple. No stress, no trouble. Just one more dull errand before heading home for dinner. The sun was low, spreading warm light across the parking lot. People moved in and out quietly, faces tired from the long day. Inside, the wait dragged on longer than expected, so the clerk suggested I step outside until my number was called. I sat on a short concrete bench near the entrance, clearly meant for waiting customers, opened my newspaper and let everything slow down for a moment. No phone, no noise, just pages turning and the hum of traffic in the distance. That was when Karen noticed me. I sensed it before I saw her, that sharp feeling of being stared at. She stood near the doors with her arms folded tight, like she was bracing herself. Workout clothes that seemed designed to attract attention and sunglasses pushed up into her hair even though the light was fading. Her eyes stayed locked on me. I ignored it. People look. It happens. Then she snapped loudly, asking why I was just sitting there. I looked up calmly and said I was waiting to be called inside. Her face tightened as if I had personally offended her. She claimed I had been sitting too long. I checked my watch, barely 5 minutes. She stepped closer and demanded to know what I was reading. I lifted the newspaper and her lips pressed into a thin line. She said nobody just sits outside places like this reading newspapers and that it looked suspicious. Suspicious. That one word changed everything. I knew once someone decides you make them uncomfortable, the facts no longer matter. Karen pulled out her phone, and suddenly the ordinary evening turned into something else. She didn't bother lowering her voice. She walked in slow circles like she was performing for an invisible crowd. She said there was a man loitering outside, watching people, refusing to leave, acting strange. Every sentence was vague but heavy with emotion, shaped to sound dangerous without being clearly false. I stayed where I was, folded my newspaper carefully, and placed my hands on my knees where they could be seen. Not because I had to, but because I understood how fast stories become fixed once spoken. People began to look. A woman with a stroller glanced from me to Karen. A man leaving the building slowed down, unsure of what he was walking into. Karen ended the call with a pleased nod and announced that the police were on their way. Then she added sweetly that if I wasn't doing anything wrong, I shouldn't be worried. I smiled, not mocking, not defensive, just calm. 10 minutes later, a patrol car arrived. 2 officers stepped out, alert and professional. Karen rushed to them first, talking quickly and adding details that hadn't existed moments earlier. I waited. When one officer asked what I was doing, I told him the same thing I had said from the start, waiting to be called inside and reading the paper. He looked at the newspaper, then at the bench, then toward the building. Reality began to quietly replace fiction. Karen felt it happening. One officer went inside while the other stayed with us. Karen stood stiff beside him, chin lifted, already convinced she had won. When the officer returned, he nodded and said I had checked in earlier and was waiting to be called. The mood shifted. Karen blinked and said I was still sitting outside. The officer looked at the bench, then at the paper, then back at her and said that wasn't illegal. Her jaw tightened and she asked if they were really going to let me stay. I smiled and said gently that I could move closer to the door if the newspaper made her nervous. One officer cleared his throat and the other smiled. Karen's face turned red. She said it was about safety and that people shouldn't just sit around watching. The officer replied that I was reading the local news and if that was suspicious, it would be a long week. That was the moment she realized authority was not on her side. She muttered something about people being too relaxed and stormed off toward her car, embarrassed and unheard. Before leaving, one officer leaned toward me and apologized, saying some people confused discomfort with danger. I nodded, folded my newspaper again and kept waiting. For the first time all evening, the bench felt like what it was meant to be, just a place to sit. If you're enjoying this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more moments where calm wins and nonsense falls apart. Soon after, my number was called. I stood up, went inside, and finished my business without any drama. No applause, no big ending, just paperwork, a polite nod, and the quiet sound of a system going back to normal. When I stepped outside again, the bench was empty and ordinary. The same bench that minutes earlier had somehow become a threat in someone else's mind. I paused for a second before leaving, letting the calm return. Cars rolled through the lot. A couple laughed near the entrance. Everything stitched itself back together like nothing strange had happened. But something had changed. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how easily calm behavior became suspicion. How sitting still, reading a newspaper, and minding my business had turned into fear and escalation. Karen never wanted answers. She wanted agreement. And when she didn't get it, she left angry, not because she was unsafe but because she was wrong. The best part wasn't watching her walk away. It was knowing I never had to raise my voice, repeat myself, or shrink to make someone else comfortable. I stayed seated. I stayed calm. And the truth spoke louder than any accusation. Sometimes the quiet response is the strongest one. And sometimes the best answer is simply staying where you already have every right to be. If this story connected with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from. It really means a lot to see how far these stories travel.